So we're going to talk about Endgame.
Alrighty.
And the genesis of Endgame was?
I don't know. Quite honestly, I gotta take a look here. No, the genesis of Endgame, that was we were doing a Caesar arc, more or less. We had started the Caesar arc when Rob wanted to do something dealing with Caesar and Xena's past, which we dealt with in Destiny. Originally, RJ and I wanted to bring in someone like Alexander. So when we started talking to Rob about that, Rob had done a lot of reading on Caesar's biographies and Caesar's history. So he wanted to do something about an incident that actually did happen to Caesar, which was truly in history. Caesar was kidnapped by pirates, held for ransom. He was very arrogant. He was actually upset at the ransom that was offered. He thought it wasn't worthy of him. And when he was finally released, the pirates actually liked him. They kind of thought he was this cocky, arrogant young kid. But he said, you know, when I get back to Rome, I'm going to basically gain a lot of power and control an army, and I'll come back and kill you all. And they laughed, and they patted him on the butt and said, go away, go away. And sure enough, that's what he did. He went back and he killed them all. And that truly happened in history. So Rob thought it would be a great idea for an episode. So we did that, and that started our Caesar arc, which in our Xenoverse, and I always separate that from the actual universe, the Xenoverse is kind of an alternate reality, as we know. So we kind of basically followed the Caesar's history. And that included the triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, and trying to mirror how the triumvirate happened, fell apart, and then ultimately how Caesar was destroyed. So Endgame is actually one of the moments in that course. Crassus has been taken care of. The war between Pompey and Caesar is going on. And the seeds to Caesar's downfall are about to be set up by Xena. And that's what this episode is. Now that's the Caesar story. The emotional story, however, has to deal a lot with how Gabrielle reacts to gaining the power of the true Amazon queen, how she deals with Ephane's death, the mirror of Amaris and her history, which is not really brought out in the series, and how Xena has to basically very gently, deal with the Gabrielle who is still learning the realities of the world. And it's also within Gabrielle's environment. These are Amazons. So Xena's kind of the outsider. So there's a whole bunch of stuff trying to go on in the script at the same time. And I'm actually amazed that I'm sitting here looking at the script and I'm realizing this script was, how many pages was it? All of our scripts are kind of on the fairly short side, but in general, a 60-page script in television is somewhere between 55, 65, 70 pages. This one's 41 pages. So we packed a lot into just 41 pages.
Dialogue.
A lot of dialogue, a lot of action, a lot of action.
And some fishing.
Yes.
There's an opening scene of Gabrielle fishing.
Yeah, that's pretty much the standard.
In tribute to Rob and his passion
Yeah,
for
pretty
fishing.
much. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of analogies that can be made off of these opening scenes. And when I write them, I generally try to set up some sort of at least character humor or characterizations, some humanities, as I call them. The fishing thing is just fun because of Rob. Because Rob was so hardcore in fishing. But some of the analogies that were set up into it, it has to deal with life and death. The idea of something dying and saying, it doesn't hurt the fish. Well, how do you know?
Yeah.
How do you know it doesn't? Now, it comes off as a comedy routine, but it's actually a serious thought I had.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, it goes back to a movie I had seen a long time ago about the first woman who was executed in a gas chamber. And just before they closed the door, the executioner, not the executioner, but the guy who was strapping her in, the way that the gas chamber works is that tablets drop into the acid and it creates the gas. And he said something to the effect of, when you hear the hissing sound, hold your breath, then breathe deeply, and you won't feel a thing. And before he turned and left, she said, how the hell do you know? And that's a damn good point.
Yeah.
So it's kind of off of that.
Yeah.
It's like, until you've gone through that kind of pain and that kind of suffering, how do you know if it's quick or not?
Right.
How do you know it's painless? But I did it in a very humorous format.
With throwing nets over Xena.
Well, that worked out great because of Lucy's reaction.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no reaction. She just kept exactly her stare at Gabrielle.
Dangerous.
which pulled off. It pulled it off really well, because with that particular stare looking at Gabrielle, it was a time bomb.
Right.
If she had thrown the net over her and she had reacted, if Lucy had Xena react to it or looked surprised or even looked angry,
Yeah.
that would have diffused it. But she didn't. She didn't change one bit of her look, and then just very casually, and you knew it was a time bomb.
Yeah.
And Gabrielle knew it was a time bomb.
And Renee responded very well.
Yes.
It's like, oh my God, it's ticking.
Yeah, exactly.
It's winding
It's
down.
kind of a very funny opening for a very tragic episode. Yeah.
So who leaps into this fishing scene is Amaris.
Mm-hmm.
How and why was Amaris born? First off, where did the name come from?
I pick a lot of my names just based on either feelings I have about characters or things that are in my room at the time. And Amaris came from the word avarice. So,
Character description?
yeah, a little bit, just a little bit. There's a whole backstory to Amaris that kind of lends itself to it, but the attitude comes across. And Amaris seemed like the right name for her, coming off of that. You know, it's not a one-for-one similarity between that and avarice. I mean, her character and avarice, but there was something about that. And when I was playing with the word avarice, and Amaris actually sounds like a sweet name, which is in contrast to what she's really like.
Spicy character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very irreverent, very iconic. How did you decide what that character, what her characteristics would be? Snippy and snide and sarcastic.
Well, she has a naivete that is the opposite of Gabrielle. In fact, I think there's a reference in the script and in the episode where Xena says that Amaris reminds her a little bit of someone she knows, looking directly at Gabrielle. And Gabrielle says, I was never like that. And I think Xena says something like, in a different way, you know, but you were. And Amaris does have her own particular viewpoint of the world, her own naivete. Gabrielle came into her situation with Xena without the worldly mask, without the worldly knowledge. So a lot of her innocence was there. She took things for granted. Amaris has no social mask, and she expresses herself without any kind of reservation. There's no filter. Whatever is in her mind, she says it. She's never really had any reason not to filter what she says. So she doesn't really have the worldly knowledge that's required to know how to talk to somebody and how to filter her responses, either for the best effect or to, you know, keep herself from getting her ass kicked.
Right. Was she brought in there to Gabrielle is a pacifist at this point. Was she brought in there to kind of balance that or offset that?
We had talked about her joining Gabrielle and Xena kind of on a semi-regular basis, much more than she was actually used. There were a number of reasons for this. One, she did bring in another element, an element which was not Xena and was not Gabrielle. You don't want to bring in a new character that replaces characters that are working. That just doesn't make sense. So obviously there was also the thought like, well, let's bring in some more eye candy. I'm not going to deny that. We always think along those lines. But also, you know, we got two actresses, Lucy and Renee, who were carrying the load of this particular series. And anytime we could find some way to bring in other characters who could take the load off of them on a production schedule, we did it. And unfortunately, we ran into very, very few characters that could carry the load as well as they could and still appeal to the audience. You know, Bruce, obviously, with Autolycus, that was one right there. Ted did a fairly good job, but quite honestly, his best playing was always off of them.
Right.
So you had them in the scene as well.
Right.
So trying to find those characters who could actually carry it without them. I mean, really, I'm trying to think right now. Obviously, Hudson.
Yeah.
Hudson, Bruce. I mean, it's really kind of hard to compete with those two girls that we had.
Right.
But every time we could try to find that, we did. And that's why certainly in the script, she has a very, very unique character that took me a long time to craft. I really wanted to find the best way to present it without stepping on any toes that were already there.
Right. We found out in season 5 that Amaris isn't really an Amazon. Did you know that when you wrote it?
Surprise to me.
Yes.
Some fan asked me about that, and I went, "Oh, really? Wow."
Uh-huh.
Well, when I left the show in the middle of season 5, and there were a lot of things that happened after that, which you know, fans have commented to me and said, "Oh, well, this happened and that happened, and did you know this?" And I was like, "No, I had no idea. You know, did you know that Boreas had a son before?" You know, No, shock to me, and quite honestly, I never wrote that script with that in my mind. The scripts that I wrote with Marias were always with the idea that this was a first and special thing, and then of course it happened later on. When I left the show, Bob and Alex came in to replace me, and anytime somebody comes in to take over a show, they have to not just take over the show, they also have to be contributors to the show. They have to make it their own. So, I don't fault them for the choices that they made. They made different choices than I would. That doesn't mean anything. If it had been in reverse, the same thing would have happened. I would have made different choices. But Amaris's background was not that she was a wannabe Amazon. There was originally a scene in the show where she talks to Xena about her background. And she talks about where she came from, and it reveals it. And for length, we couldn't keep it in the show. But I remember thinking this will make a great episode later on when this is all revealed. The basic background for Amaris is that Amaris was an Amazon. Once again, this is my interpretation. Amaris was an Amazon. She was born into a tribe which was not like the tribe of Ethne. In our Xenoverse history, the Amazon nation was one at one time, and then after the Battle of Corinth, they were split up into various tribes. And obviously we saw the northern tribes, we saw Ethne's tribe. Well, Amaris's tribe was very Spartan, very, very military. When they were born, the kids were given weapons. I mean, they weren't even given rattles or little toys or even anything that had to do with them touching or grasping objects. As early as 5 or 6 days, a dagger was put into their bed with them. They had to get used to being around weapons and be comfortable and think of them as just normal things that have to be around them. Before they could walk, they were taught to fight. They were taught to fight on the ground. They were never allowed to smile. Their parents were never allowed to show them love or affection. This was to harden them because it was a rough and hard world. In fact, in their your entire life as an Amazon in this particular tribe, to actually smile or laugh or enjoy somebody or their presence and show any of the usual human emotions that we take for granted, that was considered to be dishonorable. And in fact, to fight in battle and to die in battle was the height of honor. That was the way to do it. Now, this particular tribe, Amaris's mother was a fairly high-placed official in this tribe. At one point, as Amaris told the tale to Xena, at one point the tribe found itself at war with the Horde, which I created in the Price. And Amaris says, we don't even know how it started, but it started, as wars usually do. And they were fighting for their lives. Now, if any Amazon tribe could have gone up against the Horde, this was the one. But they were overrun. And Amaris tells a story of how her last memories of that battle, the entire tribe has been wiped out, the village has been overrun, and it's her and her mother, and they're on a cliff over a river. And they're fighting, the last two surviving. And they know that they're going to die. And then at a certain moment, Amaris says, the next thing I remember, I'm in the water, and I'm being pushed downstream by the current. And I looked back up at my mother, who was still fighting, and just before she was killed, she looked at me and smiled. Now, that has defined her character since then. Because in Amaris's mind, so many things went through her mind at that moment. Suddenly, she saw love from her mother, which that's considered to be dishonorable, but it didn't honor her mother. And her mother was still a warrior. And her mother died in front of her. And also, worst of all, she suspects the reason she fell into the river is because her mother pushed her in. So her mother saved her life. And having her life saved was dishonorable. So from that point on, Amaris basically is living on a death wish. That's why she's the way she is. That's why she'll run into battle and she will fight anyone. And she loves it. She enjoys it because she's living on borrowed time. And if she's killed by one of these people, all the better. But you know what? She's not being killed. And in fact, when you read the script with that in mind, think about the fact that when she was fighting Brutus in the opening, Ethne saved her.
Right, right.
That adds some emotional weight right there. I mean, she loved Ethne.
Right.
But Ethne did save her. That was her honorable death that was robbed from her. It happens a little bit later on as well, during the ambush. Yes, the ambush scene. So there's a lot of places in here that once you know that particular background, you begin to understand why this character is the way it is. And why she has no fear, none whatsoever. She doesn't. I mean, what's the first thing she says to Xena?
I thought you were taller.
I thought you were taller.
Right.
Okay? Now she knows about Xena. She
Yeah.
knows her reputation. She even said, in fact, the way I edited in the script was, she says, "I'm Xena." She goes, "Xena, major mistake." And then she goes, "Thought you'd be taller."
Right.
Okay, well, that's fighting words anywhere
Yeah.
else, but not with her. It's just like, that's a matter of fact. I really thought you'd be taller. I mean, your legend is bigger than you are. She would have said that.
Yeah.
She has no fear. What's Xena going to do? Kill her? Hey, death by Xena? Is that a more honorable death that you could have in her tribe? So every time she referenced "in my tribe," she's trying to reclaim something she thought she lost, because her tribe was perfect in her mind.
I wondered why that phrase kept coming up.
It's better explained with that scene.
Mm.
It does sound kind of like an annoying mantra,
Mm.
but it really has a purpose, because in her tribe, she's having a hard time adjusting to how the real world is, and she's beginning to realize that the things in her tribe weren't necessarily the things that were necessary.
Right.
So when Ethne found her, Ethne understood and took her in, and basically was kind of her surrogate mother. The rest of the tribe did not really like her. The rest of Ethne's tribe did not like Amaris,
Right.
obviously. But Ethne did, because she saw something. I mean, think about where Ethne came from. First time she met Gabrielle. Well, even Gabrielle says that in there. You know, first time we met, you hated me.
You were another wiseacre. And
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So there's a lot of similarities there that Ethne said, "This was me. I can work with this."
The death of Ethne. You killed Ethne.
Yeah.
People have come up and
Ask
tried
me
to
about
strangle
that.
you for that, right?
Yeah, they
Yes.
told me that I was, how dare you
Um,
kill her? I'm gonna get a T-shirt that says "Ethne, I killed her."
You said that Ethne's death gave the episode more dramatic drive for Gabrielle, but you had another version of where Ethne lived. Can you tell us how it came about that the character was killed off here?
So Ethne's death. So I am the one who killed Ethne. The way that came about is I needed to have an emotional anchor for the episode. There were several different emotional tracks that happened in this particular episode, one of them being the Amazons taken as slaves. But when I was originally putting it together, I wanted to use Ethne in a central role as that anchor. And I could have gone either way. She either could have been killed or she could have been wounded. And one version I had her basically in a coma for the entire episode. Now, both of them, or either one of them, would have played out differently than the other. I think in the one with her as a coma, I had Xena's frustration that with all her medical skills, it looked like she was going to die. I had a version of it where she was in a coma and then died at the end of Act 3. But these were all up in the air. So before I started writing the script, RJ and I got into a discussion about the character and how we thought it would best be used. And then Rob got into the discussion, and I think Rob was the one that actually first brought it up. And I asked him what he wanted me to do. And he brought it up first because he said something about, "What do you think about her dying?" And I said, "Well, she's my character. I really don't want her to die. I think there's more we can do with her, but, what do you think?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." He goes, "Let me get back to you." And the next time I talked to him, he says, "I talked to Danielle, and she wants the character to end." And, Danielle had a lot of stuff going on in her life at the time. And I think she thought that the character wasn't going to go anywhere. So I said, "Well, just give me the final word, and I'll do it, but I need to know before I start writing the script." So we decided to go ahead and kill her off. And the opening scene, I reread it last night. I crafted it. It took a while to actually craft that correctly, because the death of Ethne had to be a specific type of heroic death. Because I was balancing the Brutus character, and Brutus had to be powerful in his own right. I was balancing the fact that Brutus, aside from being a good fighter, in this episode could not be a bad person. And Ethne, obviously being who she was, you would say, well, Ethne could have defeated him. But she didn't, because, well, was it because he was a better fighter, or was it because she was encumbered by Amaris? What was it? There's all sorts of things. But one of the things I remember specifically putting in is that when she was killed, I think I wrote it, as the blade slides into her body, her expression doesn't change. Doesn't change at all. There's no shock, there's no fear, there's no pain. She's just staring intently at Brutus, because that's how she was as a fighter. And for Amaris to see that, that's truly the hero's death.
Now,
And Solari I just killed because I could. Now Solari, I liked the character Solari, but I believe we couldn't get the actress.
Oh.
And I needed something to make it, to take it really home to the audience. So, you know, Effie's death would have been enough, I admit that. But when you're sitting there saying it's Effie and Solari, my God, what are these people going to do next? You know, you want to keep the audience on their toes. They didn't know who we were going to kill next. Really didn't. I mean, in our series, that's one thing about it. Week to week, you didn't know who was going to die.
You know, they do that a lot now, but they didn't do that much back then.
No, back then it was considered a complete surprise.
Right, yeah. Effie was chasing Pompey, because he's the one who raided the village, and yet she wound up being killed by Brutus.
Mm-hmm.
Almost as if this, you know, was an accident. I mean...
Well, Brutus wasn't there to challenge the Amazon. At this point in the triumvirate, Pompey and Caesar are at war. They had their alliance. Obviously that broke down. We knew that was going to break down. Part of that had to do with the way Xena took care of Crassus. But Pompey was trying to finance a war against Caesar. Crassus was the money man. He was gone. Pompey had an army, but he didn't have money. Caesar had the people. So that's where the balance was. Now Caesar had Rome at this point, so he had Rome's armies. But Pompey still had an effective army out there. So what Pompey was doing was looking for ways he could make money to arm his soldiers and go back and take Rome. So he was the one who invaded the Amazon land. He attacked the Amazons. When Effie came upon the battlefield, that was Pompey's doing. Now, all they know is that it was Romans. Effie and the rest of the Amazons could not distinguish one Roman from another. They're all Romans. Brutus showing up was a total accident, because Brutus was not there to fight the Amazons. Brutus was there to follow Pompey so he could report back to Caesar. So when he showed up at the battlefield, he was following Pompey. Here's one of Pompey's battles. He just showed up at the wrong time, at the wrong place. And when Effie showed up, the Amazons see the Romans, they know the Romans have killed their sisters, and boom, that just starts. It wasn't that they wanted to fight. I've got Effie and Brutus calling out their commands almost simultaneously, because the spark started at the same time. And if you kind of look at the dialogue, you'll notice that a lot of what they're yelling out is not necessarily attack, kill, 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 kill. It's more tactics, which basically means it's not like, oh, you know, Effie wouldn't immediately say, oh, you're my enemy and I'm going to kill you, because she has that much sense to her. So she's more like form up, move here, move this, but the battle goes completely out of control. And that was the thing I was talking about, trying to play Brutus as somebody who's not a bad person, because he did not want to kill her.
There was a great look on David Franklin's face as Brutus stabs Effie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, a real stunned kind of, or just a moment of some kind of recognition.
Well, it plays off of. Yeah, it's interesting. I'd be curious about that too, because it plays off of what he was thinking. Mm-hmm. What it plays off, for me, is what I said earlier about Effie dying, staring directly at him, still fixated on him. For Brutus, when he has killed people in the past, they have screamed, they have fallen down, they have reacted. This woman, he won that fight, but she was still scaring him, because he realized, I killed you, but I didn't defeat you.
Right.
Now, for him, for a Roman soldier of his position, that's something he's not used to. That's why he talks about her later on. She made such an impression on him. She was a great warrior. I'm going to remember her name.
As a little kind of funny aside, it was the fans noticed that when Chilapa, I guess, described Brutus, you know, as this guy, and he had a silver suit on, and Xena goes, Brutus. Mm-hmm. Was he the only person in Caesar's army who wore
actually, let me bring that up, because I looked at that in the script too.
You know, and I went back to see, because I forgot Romans wore that leather stuff. So he certainly was the only one on the field with a silver.
The script is here. It's always the last. But see, sometimes what's here and there in the script, line edits and things like that happen. So we're in the inside of it. We don't have the objectivity that the fans have later on. So I remember reading that as well, where he says, or she says, the thing about Brutus.
Right after they come into the village, it's very early on.
Oh, young black hair, wore a falcon crest on his sleeve. That was the key.
Jeez, I don't. We should check and see. I don't think that's in there.
That's the line. What did he look like? Young black hair, wore a falcon crest.
Maybe they did, and maybe I thought Falcon Crest was.
The TV series?
No, was something that a lot of Romans wore. That I wouldn't have realized that might
No,
have been a personal
I made that a specific thing that
emblem.
was him.
Oh,
At least I
okay.
tried to make it sound that way in dialogue, so the assumption could be she recognized that as an individual singer.
Right. So we've just listened to the episode, and the description was young, black hair, wore silver armor,
Mhm.
and the original script said.
Yeah, and that could have been changed for any particular
What
reason.
did
I
the-
wasn't down there.
what did the
The original
original
script said wore a falcon crest on his sleeve. So that could have been changed for any particular reason.
And that was how
You know-
Zeta was supposed to recognize was Brutus and not just
Right.
any old
And
captain.
a lot of these changes, let's see, the best way to explain them is when they get down on the set, some decisions are made for good reasons at the moment, but wrong reasons ultimately. And whatever I can come up with a dozen reasons why somebody would have said, we need to change this. It's quite possible, we don't have a shirt that looks like that, or we don't have a falcon crest.
Right.
The problem with that is when you're shooting, 3,000 miles away,
Yeah.
you don't have the luxury of calling back to the office and saying, okay, we have to change this to a, silver such and such, does that work? In which case I would have said, well, no, that doesn't work because it misses the point, there's nothing identifiable about that.
Right.
So, for the most part, it was, even with the time difference, we would get phone calls every now and then asking about certain points. And on other shows I've worked on where you're more accessible to the set, the phone calls are like continuous
Ah.
because things happen. So
Okay.
I have no idea why it was changed, but that was what was in the script.